This changes everything. Donald Trump's barrage of trade protectionist tariffs have already forced over 50 countries to be willing to negotiate a fairer trade policy, and no one put it better than Karoline Leavitt on this CNN segment. Watch her dodge this host's verbal landmines before I tell you what's really going on.
Joining us right now is White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Karoline, thank you very much for your time this morning. There's been a lot of reaction overnight since the announcement and since we all basically were asleep. What is the White House reaction to, as we just had those numbers up, global markets tumbling this morning and futures down sharply?
To anyone on Wall Street this morning, I would say trust in President Trump. This is a president who is doubling down on his proven economic formula from his first term. We saw wages increase. We saw inflation come down. We had a Trump energy boom. We had the largest tax cuts in history. And that's exactly what the president intends to do following his historic announcement yesterday for reciprocal tariffs. It's the golden age rule for the golden age of America. And the United States of America is no longer going to be cheated by foreign nations around the world. And as the president declared yesterday, this is indeed a national emergency. We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit and counting. We've had 90,000 factories close in the last couple of decades. Since 1997, Americans have been put out of 5 million manufacturing jobs. These are not just statistics. These are real American lives that have been impacted. And it's about time we have a president who actually does something about it. This is going to restore more wealth, more jobs, more economic prosperity to our great country.
And of the many flip sides that the mainstream media conveniently leaves out, it's that we've already seen a Trump economy in the first term where a lot of these tariffs, especially on Chinese imports, were placed to adjust the trade balance with a foreign adversary. And remember, that was an economy that received a favorable approval rating from a majority of Americans, according to polling data from the time, especially before the pandemic. By the way, I want you to be a part of these important conversations that we have here every day, so please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to never miss out. Now, you know what makes Karoline Leavitt's words sound so true? It's that when you go back and look at the first few months of the Biden administration, they had announced an intention to continue and even expand many of the tariffs on Chinese imports because of the reshoring of manufacturing and lower trade deficit that it was leading to. And despite what you don't see the acknowledgement in this replacing of trade relations, China and the rest of the world has more to lose because it has the beneficiary of the old status quo.
The foreign minister of Norway in Brussels for NATO meetings said this morning that the tariffs could violate an article of the NATO treaty that orders members to promote economic stability and collaboration. If this is a breach of the NATO treaty, will the president reassess his approach?
No, the president is firm in his approach, and the president is ensuring economic stability here in the United States of America. Yesterday, he was joined in the Rose Garden by everyday Americans, middle-class workers. You heard from one of them who the president invited on stage by name because he knows this man and he knows what the impact of globalization has done to communities like Detroit, Michigan, where auto workers have been put out of jobs, where we've seen factories shut down. We have offshored critical supply chains in our country. Do we want our critical supplies like life-saving medical medicines and chips being made in China, or do we want them being made right here in the United States of America? Every American knows the answer to that question. This is a common sense policy. And if these countries wanted to negotiate, if these countries wanted to do what's right, they've had 70 years to do it. Instead, they have been ripping off American workers. And President Trump has made it very clear that this is a policy he was going to implement. He campaigned on the idea of fair trade, on tariffs, and nearly 80 million Americans elected him to do it, and he is delivering.
And you know what's crazy? If you look at it from a bird's eye view, the massive trade and fiscal deficit this country has been running with was almost a choice between sleepwalking into bankruptcy or temporary pain to turn things around. And for way too long, this country has been slowly walking into higher and higher deficits, fueling national debts over $36 trillion and a trade deficit that has substantially increased in the last 4 years to $1.2 trillion, with almost a third of that coming from China. And the undeniable fact is these are the desperate measures for desperate times that Americans voted for with a mandate, because none of this would have been needed if these massive trade and budget deficits were actually made better rather than much, much worse. In the last 12 of the 16 years that the left has ruled this country.
The president has acknowledged that Americans could feel some pain with these tariffs, with this announcement. How much pain is the president comfortable with Americans feeling, even on a temporary basis?
Well, again, to that a wonderful American farmer, the president has your back and he wants to protect you and your family-owned farm. That is the point of these tariffs. As far as
are you going to do anything to ease the pain?
Absolutely. We're working on that every single day. The American people and the naysayers need to look at the whole of government economic approach that this administration is taking. The president has already launched a massive deregulatory agenda, which we know has saved the American taxpayer millions of dollars. He is also unleashing the might of our American energy industry, which we know is the greatest driver of inflation. It's one of the many reasons we had an inflation crisis in the previous administration. The president is unleashing American energy to bring down the cost of living in this country. We also know, again, in the president's first term, while he effectively implemented tariffs, wages went up. The median wage in America went up by $6,500. And so it is the goal of this president to have higher wages, less inflation, and tax cuts. That's the second step of the Trump economic agenda. More money back into the pockets of hardworking American. No taxes on tips, overtime, or Social Security. We're counting on Congress to get it done, and that's the next step of the Trump economic boom.
It's such an interesting contradiction you see among the modern Democrats. They are for the free market and globalization on the international stage, even to the extent of domestic workers and jobs being undercut, but strive for overregulation and high taxation at home. And it's both of those ends of the spectrum that need to be rebalanced, bringing back essential jobs, giving back more purchasing power to the common voter, and reshoring critical industries like metal and semiconductors is part of the holistic tariff approach. Besides, most of our largest trading partners in Asia, like China and Japan, use a lot more than just explicit tariffs to make it harder for foreign companies to do business there, because there's a lot more ways for them to tacitly protect their domestic industries than imposing tariffs on American goods that flies under the radar of these discussions. And also, we've even got the first Trump term to measure against a reference point, because a lot of this doomsdaying on mainstream media existed even back then.
When he left office, inflation was 1.4%. He implemented many tariffs in his first term that did bring in billions of dollars in revenue. In fact, the previous administration knew they were so effective, that's why they left them in place. So again, the president is delivering on his promise to implement reciprocal tariffs while his administration is working hard every day to cut regulation, to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse in our federal government as well. And tax cuts are the next step of this economic agenda, which will lead to more investment, more money in our economy, more economic growth.
One quick question, because I've heard it suggested. Is there any chance that the president will pull back on implementing these tariffs before they go into effect this weekend?
The president made it clear yesterday, this is not a negotiation. This is a national emergency. He's always willing to pick up the phone to answer calls, but he laid out the case yesterday for why we are doing this. And these countries around the world have had 70 years to do the right thing by the American people, and they have chosen not to. They have ripped off American workers. They have taken our jobs overseas. The president is putting an end to that yesterday.
Now there's reports that more than 50 countries have already started ringing phones and sending delegations to renegotiate trade relations, which is the first step toward a global trade rebalancing in favor of the domestic industry and workers. And that's a sign that those countries always had more to lose from this rebalancing than America did in the last few decades. But you let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen, because I think the next few weeks are critical for whether there will be renegotiations or whether these tariffs will continue for even longer.